Attention, brave souls. What you're about to witness might make your heart race. Before the suspense takes over your screen, click subscribe now and hit the like button. Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. But be warned, only the boldest will survive until the end.
Hi, my name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old and I work as a freelance graphic designer. You probably wouldn't recognize me. I don't stand out much. I keep to myself and live a quiet life. At least I used to. I've hesitated to share this story, but I think it needs to be told. Not for me, but for anyone who might find themselves ignoring the little things. The warning signs that something isn't quite right. Because that's exactly what I did, and it almost cost me everything. Let me take you back to 2005, the year I moved into a small house in rural Kentucky. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, modest, surrounded by thick woods, with just one neighbor nearby. That's how I liked it, peaceful, quiet. I'd left behind the chaos of the city for this. My first encounter with Harold Griggs, the man who lived next door, didn't strike me as strange. He was older, 70s, maybe, and had this frail look about him. His house was a relic of neglect, peeling paint, overgrown yard, and a sagging porch that creaked when he walked out to greet me on my first day. New in town, he asked with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice had a raspy edge, like someone who'd spent a lifetime smoking unfiltered cigarettes. "Yeah, just moved in," I replied, keeping it polite but short. There was something about him, something I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe it was the way he stood, too still, or the way his eyes lingered on me just a beat too long. "Well," he said, "let me know if you need anything. Not much happens around here, but the woods." He paused, glancing toward the tree line behind our houses. The woods have a way of keeping things interesting. That should have been my first red flag, but I brushed it off. He was just a lonely old man, right? The first few nights in the house were uneventful. I spent my days unpacking and working my dog, Max, always by my side. But then the noises started, faint at first, scratches, whispers, almost like someone or something was moving just outside the windows. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe raccoons or coyotes. After all, this was the country, but Max didn't seem convinced. He'd sit by the back door, ears up, growling low and steady into the dark. Then one night, I woke up to Max barking like crazy. He was at the back door again, his body rigid, tail stiff. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The air was thick and still, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I swept the beam of light across the yard, and that's when I saw it. A shadow moving along the edge of the woods. It was too big to be an animal, but whoever, or whatever, it was disappeared before I could get a good look. The next morning, I saw Harold outside, tending to his garden, or burying something in it. I couldn't be sure. When he noticed me watching, he waved, but I didn't wave back. "Your dog okay?" he called out. "Heard him barking last night." "Yeah, he's fine," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Probably just a raccoon or something." Harold tilted his head, as if considering this. "Funny thing about raccoons," he said, his voice casual but deliberate. "They know when to keep their distance. Most animals around here do." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and went back inside. That night, Max disappeared. I'd let him out into the yard like always, but when I called for him to come back, he didn't. I searched the property, my flashlight cutting through the dark, my voice cracking as I called his name over and over. I even went to Harold's house, knocking on his door, hoping maybe Max had wandered over there. Harold answered after what felt like an eternity, his face calm, almost amused. "Haven't seen him," he said. "But you might want to check the woods. Things have a way of getting lost in there." There it was again, that tone, that faint smirk that made my stomach twist. I thanked him and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something he wasn't telling me. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window, staring out at Harold's house. His lights stayed on late, and once again I heard those noises, the faint scratches, the whispers. Only this time, they weren't outside my house, they were coming from his. I never wanted to be the kind of person who meddles in other people's lives. I came to this quiet, sleepy corner of Kentucky to escape the noise, the chaos, the ceaseless hum of city life. Yet here I was, standing on the edge of Harold Grigg's yard, watching the dim glow of his basement window flicker like a warning light in the dark. It had been 3 days since Max disappeared. 3 days of calling his name into the woods, leaving out food bowls, and wandering the trails behind the house with a flashlight and a sinking feeling in my chest. Harold's casual remark, "Saw him near my yard, but dogs wander, don't they?" played over and over in my mind, each time feeling heavier, darker. The noises from Harold's house didn't stop. Every night, like clockwork, there were muffled thuds, scraping sounds, and once, something that sounded disturbingly like a faint cry. My imagination ran wild, conjuring images I didn't want to believe. But I had to know. I waited until Harold left. He always drove his old, sputtering pickup into town at the same time every Thursday afternoon. He'd buy groceries, drink coffee at the diner, and linger just long enough for me to do what I needed to do. The door to his house wasn't locked. That alone sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if Harold didn't believe anyone would dare step inside. The air was stale and heavy, carrying a strange mix of mildew and something metallic. The floor creaked under my feet as I moved cautiously through the dimly lit rooms, every nerve in my body on edge. His living room was cluttered but ordinary mismatched furniture, a faded rug, stacks of old newspapers. But it was the silence that unnerved me the most. The kind of silence that felt alive, as if the house itself was watching me. I found the basement door near the kitchen. It was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated, gripping the handrail as if it might steady the storm of fear swirling inside me. My heart pounded in my ears as I took the first step, then another, until I was swallowed by the shadows below. The basement was colder than I expected, and the faint hum of an old freezer filled the space. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow light over the room. My eyes scanned the space, and that's when I saw it, the chest. It sat in the corner, partially obscured by a stack of crates. An old, weathered thing, its hinges rusted, its wood scarred and scratched. My hands trembled as I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had come too far. The lid creaked as I opened it, revealing a collection of items that made my blood run cold. Jewelry, delicate necklaces, tarnished rings, bracelets that looked like they hadn't been worn in decades. Photographs, faded and brittle, of women I didn't recognize, and at the bottom, a stack of newspaper clippings. My hands shook as I lifted them, each headline striking like a dagger. Local woman missing. Search continues for disappeared wife. Vanishing mystery in rural Kentucky. I froze. One photo, yellowed with age, caught my eye. It was Harold, much younger, standing beside a woman with a soft smile and kind eyes. His wife. The woman who had vanished without a trace. A sudden creak from upstairs snapped me out of my trance. My breath caught in my throat. He was home. I fumbled to close the chest, my fingers clumsy with panic. Footsteps echoed above, slow and deliberate. Each step felt like a hammer pounding against my chest. I needed to get out, but the stairs might as well have been a mile away. "Emily," his voice called out low and calm. "I know you're here." The air felt like it was being sucked out of the room. I pressed myself against the cold wall, heart racing, mind spinning. How did he know my name? "You shouldn't have come here," he continued, his tone eerily conversational, as if we were chatting over tea. "People don't like it when you poke around in things that don't belong to you." I heard the basement door creak open, his steps descending slowly, each one driving a nail into my growing sense of dread. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but my legs felt frozen, rooted in place by terror. "You know," Harold said, his voice closer now, "the woods, they have a way of keeping secrets. But you You're not very good at that, are you? I grabbed the nearest thing, a rusted pipe lying on the floor, and clutched it like a lifeline. As his shadow stretched across the basement wall, I braced myself, every muscle tensed, knowing this was a game I might not win. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs as I crouched in the shadows of Harold's suffocatingly dark basement. His calm, measured footsteps echoed above me, each creak of the floorboards sending chills down my spine. My discovery had confirmed my worst fears, but I hadn't anticipated how utterly unhinged Harold was. I had to get out, but his voice stopped me in my tracks. "You know," he called out, his tone unnervingly casual. "Curiosity is dangerous, especially for someone like you, Emily." My breath hitched. How did he know my name? The light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered erratically, casting grotesque, shifting shadows on the walls. I could hear him descending the stairs now, each step deliberate, like a predator savoring the hunt. Clutching the edge of a rusty metal shelf for balance, I frantically scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon. My hands trembled as I grabbed a heavy wrench. It wasn't much, but it was something. Harold's figure emerged at the base of the stairs. His shadow stretched long across the floor, distorting him into something monstrous. His face was half hidden in the dim light, but I could see his eyes, cold and devoid of humanity. "You're not the first to poke around where you shouldn't," he said, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "But I'll make sure you're the last." I didn't wait for him to take another step. I hurled the wrench at a nearby shelf, sending its contents crashing to the floor. The loud clang reverberated through the basement, and in the chaos, I darted toward the stairs. "Emily," Harold bellowed, his calm facade finally cracking. I didn't look back. My legs burned as I raced up the stairs and out the door, slamming it behind me. The crisp night air hit me like a slap to the face, but there was no time to revel in the fleeting sense of freedom. I sprinted toward the woods, the only place I could think to hide. The forest was dense and disorienting, the bare branches twisting above me like skeletal fingers. My lungs hived as I ran, tripping over roots and stumbling into thorny bushes that tore at my clothes. Behind me, Harold's voice carried through the trees, a haunting melody of taunts. "You think you can run from me, Emily? The woods don't forget, they don't forgive." I crouched behind a fallen tree, pressing myself into the damp earth. The sound of Harold's boots crunching through the underbrush grew louder, closer. My mind raced. If he found me, there'd be no escape. Suddenly, a faint but unmistakable sound reached my ears, sirens. A surge of hope coursed through me. The call I had made earlier, the one I had left open, had worked. Help was coming. But Harold had heard them too. His movements grew frantic, his voice rising in panic. "You brought them here, didn't you? You think they'll save you?" I stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe as the sirens grew louder, their wails cutting through the oppressive silence of the woods. Blue and red lights flashed in the distance, illuminating the gnarled trunks of the trees. Harold turned and fled deeper into the forest, his shadow dissolving into the darkness. Moments later, officers burst onto the scene, their flashlights sweeping the area. I stumbled out from my hiding spot, tears streaming down my face as I waved them down. "He's in there," I managed to choke out, pointing toward the direction Harold had run. The police wasted no time. They fanned out, their voices calling for Harold to surrender. It didn't take long before I heard a struggle and the unmistakable sound of handcuffs clicking into place. Back at Harold's house, the grim reality of what I had stumbled upon came into focus. The police unearthed shallow graves in his garden, confirming what I already knew but didn't want to admit. Among the remains were traces of his wife and other missing persons, their stories hidden for decades beneath layers of soil and secrecy. I stood there, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the scene as it unfolded. The chill in the air was nothing compared to the icy dread that clung to my bones. In the days that followed, I packed up my life in that quiet little town. Peace was what I had come here for, but what I found was a nightmare I would carry with me forever. As I drove away for the last time, I couldn't help but glance at Harold's house one final time. It sat there, silent and empty, but the darkness it held would never truly leave. And neither would the sound of Harold's voice echoing in my mind. The woods don't forget,